Hello everyone, and welcome back to Scary Dark Narrations. Tonight, we are redescending into one of the darkest and most dangerous corners of American history. The abandoned mines hidden deep within the Appalachian Mountains. In this episode, you'll hear 9 of the most disturbing true horror stories ever connected to these forgotten underground tunnels, places where daylight never reaches. Maps stop making sense, and people have vanished without a trace. These are not legends passed around campfires, and they are not internet creepy. Every story you're about to hear comes from real witnesses. Miners, hikers, urban explorers, and locals, people who entered these abandoned mines and encountered something they were never meant to find. From explorers who realized they were not alone in miles of collapsed tunnels, to search teams who found evidence that shouldn't exist underground, to survivors who escaped with their lives, but left parts of themselves behind in the darkness. Some names and exact locations have been altered to protect those involved, but the events themselves remain exactly as they were experienced. What happened inside these mines is real, and in many cases, still unexplained. The Appalachian region has a long memory. These mountains have been hollowed out for centuries, and some of what was uncovered should have stayed buried forever. So, before we begin, make sure you resubscribe to Scary Dark Narrations for more true horror stories rooted in real places and real encounters. Turn on notifications, lock your doors, and dim the lights, because once we go underground tonight, there may not be a way back out. I've been a geologist for 11 years. Long enough to know that the Earth remembers everything you try to forget. Fault lines don't heal. Pressure doesn't disappear. It just waits. Of all the places I've mapped collapsed shafts in Nevada, flooded tunnels in West Virginia, salt mines that hummed like living things, there is only one site that still slips into my thoughts uninvited. Usually in that thin, dangerous moment between waking and sleep. The Crowley Mine, Eastern Kentucky, shut down in 1987 for what the official report called structural instability, which is a professional way of saying something happened underground that nobody wanted to explain in daylight. When my firm assigned me to assess it for historical preservation in March of 2024, I treated it like any other contract. 3 days, measurements, air quality readings, photographic documentation, a neat little report. Routine, clean, forgettable. That's what I told myself while driving the last mile of gravel road, my tires crunching too loudly in a forest that seemed to be holding its breath. The entrance sat halfway up a wooded slope, framed by rotting timber supports and rusted rail tracks that vanished into blackness so complete it felt poured in. The forest around it was wrong in a subtle way, like a sentence with one extra word you can't immediately spot. The trees barely moved, even with the wind threading through them. No birds, no insects, just the soft creak of wood settling and my own breathing. Suddenly too loud. I ran through my equipment checklist twice. Headlamp, backup lamp, gas detector, GPS beacon, emergency radio. Everything green, everything perfect. I snapped a photo of the entrance for the timestamp metadata, 10:47 a.m. Only later did I notice the detail that would come back to ruin me. In the lower left of the frame, half-shadowed, someone had carved 7 vertical lines into the main support beam. Deep, deliberate, not old. Either the exposed wood was still pale, raw-looking, like a fresh wound that hadn't learned to scar yet. The moment I stepped inside, the temperature dropped hard, like crossing an invisible border. 15 degrees colder within 20 feet. My breath fogged the air. The tunnel was wider than I expected, 12 feet across, shored up with heavy timber that groaned under the mountain's weight in a way that felt intimate, almost conversational. My boots crunched on cold fragments and something else mole-white, curved. I crouched, picked one up, and felt my stomach tighten. A tooth, human molar, root, still attached. I told myself it was a relic from the mining days. Men worked until their bodies failed them. Accidents happened. Teeth got lost. History is messy underground. Still, my hand shook as I sealed it in a sample bag. Protocol demanded documentation of all findings, even the ones that made your skin feel like it didn't quite fit anymore. 200 yards in, the tunnel branched. The main shaft continued straight. A narrower passage veered left, sloping down at an aggressive angle. My survey map said to stay straight, but sound doesn't care about maps. From the left passage came a steady dripping. Regular. Precise. I paused and counted without meaning to. Drip. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. Drip. Mines. Collect water. That wasn't strange. What was strange was the rhythm. Too exact, like someone timing it on purpose. I marked the junction on my GPS and checked the air quality meter. Oxy-normal. No toxic gases. I continued down the main shaft. The dripping followed me. Not louder. Not closer. Just present. Present. Echoing through stone in ways that didn't make sense. Maintaining that same 3-second interval no matter how far I walked. Drip. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. 3 Mississippi. Half a mile in, I reached an old workstation carved into the wall. A rusted lunch pail. A dented thermos. A folded newspaper, yellowed but intact. October 14th, 1987. The headline read, "Local mine continues operations despite worker concerns." The article mentioned unusual sounds and missing time during shifts. 3 workers quit in the same week. The mine closed 12 days later. I took photos, made notes, stayed professional, detached, except my mouth had gone dry, and I realized I was counting the drips out loud. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber where 4 passages converged. My headlamp struggled, its beam swallowed by a darkness that felt less like absence and more like resistance. The space was vast, cathedral-like, and I had the irrational sense that I was interrupting something private. I swept the light across the walls and froze. Scratch marks. Hundreds of them, some shallow, some gouged deep into the rock. They weren't random. They formed spirals, 7-pointed stars, and words carved over and over until the stone looked flayed. Counting wrong, counting wrong, counting wrong. My hands trembled. The dripping stopped. Silence settled, thick and deliberate. Then, from the passage directly ahead, I heard a single drop. Not water. Too thick. Too slow. Too intentional. And in that moment, Standing in the dark with my light shaking and my breath fogging the air, a thought slid into my mind, fully formed and unwelcome. Then, the silence learned my name. I should have left. Every instinct I possessed told me to turn around, retrace my steps, feel fresh air in my lungs, write a report full of cautious language and legal padding. But geologists don't flee from darkness. We explain it. We label it. We pretend understanding is the same thing as control. So I told myself the scratch marks were the product of fear and confinement. Men losing their grip underground. History, again, being messy. The dripping resumed behind me. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, drip. And then another rhythm joined it, slower. 1 drop every 7 seconds. They overlapped, misaligned, until every 42 seconds they synchronized perfectly. Each time they did, the air shifted, like the mountain itself was inhaling around me. I raised my radio for a routine check-in. Static. I adjusted the frequency. Still static, but threaded through it was something else. A voice. Counting. 38, 39, 40, 41. I keyed the transmitter. This is Hartley. Checking in. Over. The counting stopped. The static cleared, and my own voice answered me, identical down to the smallest inflection. This is Hartley. Don't come down here. Over. I dropped the radio. The clatter echoed too long, too loud. The dripping stopped again. 5 seconds of absolute silence. Then both rhythms returned. Faster now. Every 2 seconds. Perfectly synchronized. I ran. Not a controlled retreat. Not a professional withdrawal. I ran like prey. My headlamp beams skittering across walls that seemed closer than before. I passed scratch marks I didn't remember seeing. A boot print in the coal dust that matched my tread. Exactly. A wooden sign reading, Shaft 7, Condemned. I was sure I hadn't seen it on the way in. At the next junction, I skidded to a halt. 3 passages. I had come from the middle one. I knew that, but the middle passage was boarded up with fresh planks. Nails still bright, and there, smeared across the wood, was my muddy handprint. Primera stare daret. My breath, hitching. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't been here. My GPS beacon glitched, my position fracturing into 7 pulsing points before reforming. The timestamp read 10:47 a.m. My watch read 10:47 a.m. I shook it. The second hand wasn't moving. My phone no signal. Expected but. The clock glowed back at me. 10:47 a.m. Battery at 7%. It had been full. 7 scratch marks. 7 pointed stars. Shaft 7. The dripping surged. Dozens of overlapping drops sounding like distant applause. I spun, and my light caught a figure at the far end of the tunnel. A person wearing a geologist's vest. My vest. Same reflective strips. Same equipment. Pouches. I didn't need to see the face to... Some part of me already recognized it. The figure lifted a hand wave for warning. I couldn't tell and turned away. Boots striking stone in the same rhythm as mine. As it walked into darkness, it began to count. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. The sound faded. The dripping stopped, and suddenly I was standing at the mine entrance, daylight spilling in like a lie. I stumbled out, gasping. My truck was where I'd left it, quite heading dust. I wiped the window and caught my reflection. Behind me, in the glass, someone stood in the mine entrance. I turned. Nothing. On the door panel, 7 distinct handprints pressed into the dust. All mine. I drove until my hands stopped shaking, pulled into a gas station 4 miles down the road. I tried calling my supervisor, voicemail. Checked my phone. 10:47 a.m. My watch, 10:47 a.m. The clock inside the station, 10:47 a.m. The attendant stepped out and asked if I was okay. I asked him the time. He checked his phone, 10:47. Then he noticed the coal dust. My vest, my boots leaving black prints. "Were you at Crowley Mine?" he asked, his voice flattening. "When Primera not dead?" He backed away. "You need to see Father Dominic," he said. "He'll know." He locked the door behind him. The church was small and tired, paint peeling like old skin. Father Dominic listened without interrupting, his hands trembling as he poured coffee I couldn't taste. When I finished, he laid out 7 photographs from a canvas folder. Black and white, dated 1987. 7 geologists standing at the mine entrance, confused, afraid. "They all entered on October 14th, he said, between las 10:45 and 10:50 a.m. He flipped one photo over. My name, my handwriting, the time, 10:47 a.m. "The mine doesn't take you all at once," he said. "It takes you in pieces. 7 pieces. Every time the dripping aligns, it keeps one." He met my eyes. 47 seconds. He added softly, "That's how long it takes a heart to stop after the last breath." I left. Time finally moved forward, but I count everything now. Cracks, steps, breaths. And at night, when I'm almost asleep, I hear it drip. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. Next March marks 7 years. My firm wants the mine reassessed. They want me. And the worst part is that some missing piece of me wants to go back. Because whatever I left down there is still counting, and it knows my name. I'll be here in the shadows next week. But will you return, knowing what waits in the dark? My grandfather worked the Black Vein mine for 32 years before it decided he was finished being a man. That's the only way I can describe it. Now decided. He didn't die in a collapse or a fire or one of those tidy accidents that get summarized in a paragraph at the back of a local paper. He walked into the mountain on a Tuesday morning in October of 1996 and never walked out again. No scream, no alarm, no body, just absence shaped like him. They found his lunch pail at the mouth of Shaft 3, still warm. The lid unlatched like he'd set it down for a moment and expected to be back before the coffee cooled. My grandmother swore she could still smell her kitchen on it burnt toast. Cheap grounds, a hint of cinnamon she always added without measuring. His helmet sat beside it, lamp still burning, beam aimed straight into the dark like it was waiting for permission to follow. The search lasted for days. Dogs, maps, men who knew every vein of that mountain like their own palms. Nothing. It was as if the mine had inhaled and forgotten to exhale. 28 years later, the house became mine. Same porch that sagged under its own memories. Same wallpaper stained by smoke and years of bad decisions. I told myself I was there to sell it, to close a chapter. That was a lie I needed to believe. In the attic, under a box of rusted tools and old Union flyers, I found the journal. Leathered bound, pages thin enough to feel like skin. The last entry was dated the morning he vanished. The handwriting was steady, almost calm. That scared me more than panic ever could. They're keeping count wrong. The canary hasn't sung in 6 days, but nobody notices. Nobody notices, because we stopped bringing canaries down in '84. So what have we been hearing? I read it 3 times before it settled into me. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I was drawn to forgotten labor stories, 2 places that chew men up and then get paved over. My grandfather's disappearance felt less like tragedy and more like an unfinished sentence begging for a period. I spent weeks interviewing former miners. Every conversation followed the same strange rhythm. They'd talk, laugh. Remember? Then mid-sentence, they'd stop, tilt their heads, listen. Do you hear that? They'd ask when I pressed them. They'd shake it off like a bad thought and change the subject. Only one man didn't. Tommy Bright. He worked alongside my grandfather for years. Hands scarred, voice worn thin. He told me about the counting, about how every morning at exactly 6:15, a canary would sing from somewhere deep in shaft 3. Bright, cheerful, wrong. We didn't question it, he said, fingers trembling around his glass. Canaries don't sing when they're dying. Te go git. But that thing, it sang like it was happy. The mine had been sealed in 2003 after 3 more men disappeared. Concretipud had warnings posted, but the mountain doesn't respect paperwork. I found a crack in the barrier, narrow but new, like something inside had pressed outward too hard. I told myself I was just documenting, just filming. Lies are easier in the dark. Inside, the air tasted old, sweet in a rotten way. The tunnel stretched on, rails intact, supports black with age. My footsteps echoed back at me half a second too late, like the mine was thinking before responding. 15 minutes in, my watch ticked loud enough to feel intrusive. I noticed then the second hand hesitated. Every minute, at the 47-second mark, a tiny stutter before it continued. I laughed it off. Old watch, old place, old place. Then I heard the singing. Faint at first, a melody that didn't belong underground. I checked my watch, 6:15 p.m. I followed it, past warnings sprayed into stone, past places where the dark felt layered. The sound grew clearer, and I realized it wasn't echoing. It was coming through the rock, like the mountain itself had learned the tune. The shaft opened beneath me without warning, a vertical drop swallowing my light. At its edge hung a brass cage. Inside sat a yellow bird, alive and singing. Its eyes were too dark, too aware. I reached out before sense could stop me. The moment my finger touched the bars, the song cut off. The bird opened its beak. They're keeping count wrong. My grandfather's voice filled the shaft, and the silence learned my name. I stumbled back so hard I nearly followed the shaft down. The bird resumed singing, bright and careless, like it hadn't just peeled open something in me. I told myself it was stress, hallucination, grief finding a mouth. My camera was still running. Proof lived in that red light. I retreated, and the song followed. Not louder, not softer closer. 200 yards later, the mind changed. Not in ways you'd notice immediately. The rails still ran straight. The supports still held, but details shifted like bad memories. The warning spray paint was gone. A lunch pail I'd filmed earlier now stood upright, paint unchipped. My boot prints crossed each other in the dust, looping back when I knew I hadn't turned. I scrubbed through my footage. The timestamp jumped from 6:15 to 6:37, no transition, no glitch. Just missing time. Silence fell heavy. Then footsteps echoed ahead of me, steel on stone. Someone was between me and the exit. I killed my light and stood still, breath shallow, heart loud enough to give me away. A carbide lamp flared to life. The man holding it wore old work clothes. He raised the light. My face looked back at me, older, tired, smiling wrong. "Evening," he said. "You're late." He turned, dragging something behind him. A cage? Empty. The door swung open with each step. "Your shift starts at 6:15, he called. "Don't be late. The foreman keeps count." I ran. Deeper. The light flickered, revealing cages hanging from the ceiling. Dozens of T-Mall singing in perfect time. The sound crawled inside my skull. I burst into a chamber and dropped to my knees. Names covered the walls. Thousands. I found my grandfather's. Beneath it, mine. And tomorrow's date. The singing stopped. Something breathed below us. The mountains shifted, and I understood we weren't the miners. We were the canaries. "Welcome to shift," my voice echoed back to me. "Let's work." I don't remember escaping, just fragments. Blood. Stone. Light. I emerged at 6:15 a.m. 12 hours gone, or 12 years. At the station, Officer Breckenridge showed me the photos. Men emerging. Once. Always at 6:15. My grandfather among them. "They all come out once," she said. "Then they go back." My footage was corrupted except one clip, my grandfather's voice. 6 went down. 7 came out. Though, demat. I check my reflection now. Count everything, and every morning at 6:15, I hear the singing. It's not a warning, it's a roll call. I'm driving back to the mine now. The crack is wider. The journal is open beside me. New handwriting waits on the last page. Welcome home. Your shift starts at 6:15. Don't be late. The first thing you should know about me is that I trust measurements more than memories. Measurements don't lie to make themselves easier to live with. They don't soften edges or rewrite details to help you sleep. For 15 years, as a mine safety inspector, numbers were my language, distances my reassurance. If something could be measured, it could be understood. If it could be understood, it could be controlled. That belief carried me through collapses, gas leaks, near misses that would have broken someone who relied on instinct instead of data. Mountains don't care about your feelings, but they respect precision. Or so I thought. The Garrett mine in southwestern Virginia was supposed to be routine. Closed since 1994 after a partial collapse took 3 lives. It had been sitting quietly for decades, waiting to be cataloged, assessed, and either preserved or sealed. September 2024. Clear weather. No warnings on the site file beyond the usual red stamps and faded OSHA citations. I parked my truck near the tree line, logged my entry time, and stood at the mouth of the mine with my gear laid out neatly on the tailgate. Laser rangefinder, structural sensors, notebook, and my measuring tape 50. Feet, steel, belt clip worn smooth from use. Before stepping inside, I took the entrance measurement. 8 feet, 4 inches. I checked it twice. The laser confirmed it. I wrote it down. That number mattered. It was the baseline, the anchor point, the truth everything else would reference. The air inside was cool and stale, carrying the mineral temps of old coal and damp stone. My headlamp carved a narrow tunnel out of the dark, illuminating timber supports that creaked softly as the mountain shifted around them. The main shaft extended straight ahead, just as the old survey maps indicated. I moved slowly, methodically, stopping every 50 yards to measure width, height, beam spacing. 12 feet wide, then 11, then 10. All consistent. All correct. My notebook filled with clean, orderly numbers, the handwriting tight and precise. Normal work. Familiar rhythm. The kind of routine that lets your mind wander while your hands do what they've been trained to do. 300 yards in, I reached the first extraction chamber. A circular space carved out where multiple veins had been worked at once. The walls pocked with tool marks like frozen scars. I stood in the center and swept the laser across. 30 feet, 2 inches in diameter. I walked the perimeter, unreeling my measuring tape as I went, the metal clicking softly with each extension. When I completed the circle and checked the length, the tape read 94 feet, 7 inches. I did the math automatically circumferency pi. It was close enough. Within tolerance, and yet something about the space felt compressed, like the air itself had been folded. I couldn't have said why, just a pressure behind the eyes, a subtle sense that the chamber was pretending to be larger than it wanted to be. I measured again. Same results. Laser. Tape. Both agreed, but when I counted my steps, using the stride length I'd calibrated years ago and rechecked every month, I only logged 72 paces. That was wrong. I stopped, measured my stride on the spot. 28 inches. Exact. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at the walls, listening to the quiet drip of water somewhere beyond the light. The numbers didn't reconcile, but numbers don't need to feel right to be right. I wrote everything down anyway, adding a small notation in the margin. Recheck. Later. That was when I noticed my measuring tape had recoiled on its own. The housing dial showed 94 feet, 7 inch east. Perimeter measurement. But when I pulled the tape out and examined the markings on the metal strip itself, It extended to 99 feet, 2 inches, 4 feet, 7 inches longer than it claimed to be. I ran my fingers along the steel, half expecting a splice, a trick of light. There was nothing, one continuous strip. I locked it, retracted it, extended it again. Same discrepancy. The tape disagreed with itself. Instrument failure, Primera told myself. Rare, but not impossible. I made a note to flag it in my report and continued on. The deeper I went, the more the mind began to feel inconsistent. Distances my laser measure didn't align with the time it took to walk them. Tons that should have emerged into known chambers arrived too early or too late. My stride count drifted further from the recorded measurements with every 100 yards. The mine was 3 different sizes at once, depending on how you asked the question. After nearly a mile, I reached a junction marked on the old maps. A Shaft 7 condemned. A wooden sign hung above the opening. Gray with age, but still legible. Beyond this point, measurements may vary. I stood there, staring at it longer than I should have. Not unsafe, not no entry. Measurements may vary. I took a photo. Then, because it's what I do, I measured the sign. 16 inches wide, 7 inches tall. I measured again, 19 inches wide. Same height. The third time. 23 inches wide. The wood didn't move. The grain didn't stretch, but the space it occupied kept growing, and my instruments reported it faithfully, as if nothing were wrong. I remember thinking, not for the first time that day, that silence has weight, and as I stepped toward Shaft 7, the darkness ahead of me felt like it was leaning closer, as if it had learned exactly how much room I was willing to give it. Then, the silence learned my name. I should have turned back at the sign. Any reasonable inspector would have logged the anomaly. Recommended ceiling. Let someone else argue with the data, but reason erodes quietly. The same way stone does grain by grain, pressure by pressure. 15 years of training told me anomalies are invitations, not warnings. If something doesn't fit the model, you don't abandon the model. You refine it. So I stepped into Shaft 7, clipped my measuring tape back to my belt, and began documenting. The tunnel narrowed gradually, just as expected. 12 feet at the entrance, 10 after 50 yards, 8 after another 50. A clean taper, textbook. But my stride count said I'd walked 300 yards, not 100. I stopped and looked back. The entrance was still visible, a dim rectangle of gray light no more than 30 feet behind me. I turned forward again, checked the laser. 312 yards. I felt my stomach tighten. I walked back toward the light. 5 steps brought me halfway there. Distance was no longer behaving as a fixed property. It was a suggestion. The tunnel opened abruptly into another chamber, and the moment I stepped inside, my eyes struggled to agree on what they were seeing. The walls curved inward and outward at the same time, angles folding into each other in ways that made my head ache if I stared too long. The floor felt level beneath my boots, but every visual cue insisted it sloped upward no matter where I looked. Passages branched off at intersections that shouldn't have existed, cutting through what should have been solid rock, overlapping themselves like poorly erased chalk lines. I measured. 42 feet across by laser, 27 feet, 4 inches by tape, 19 paces by stride. The numbers weren't converging anymore. They were actively contradicting each other, each insisting on its own version of the truth. I laughed once, a short, sharp sound that vanished into the chamber without echo. That was the first real fear, not the impossibility, but the realization that my tools were working perfectly. The mine was the variable. That's when I noticed the measuring tapes. Dozens of them at first, then hundreds as my light swept farther. They hung from the ceiling in clusters, clipped to timber supports and jagged stone, all fully extended. Identical to mine. Same model, same worn black casing. Each displayed a different length. Some read 60 feet, some 100, some numbers that shouldn't have fit on the dial at all. I reached for the nearest one. The tape claimed 127 feet, but the steel strip was unbroken, disappearing into a housing that couldn't possibly contain it. I pulled another. It kept extending. Past 50, past 100, past 2, the metal slid out smoothly, endlessly, as if the coil inside had no bottom. When he let go, it retracted instantly, the impossible length snapping back into place like it had never existed. That was when my own tape began to pull. At first, it was subtle, a gentle tug at my belt, like catching the strap on a nail. Then it grew firmer, rhythmic, as if something on the other end was testing resistance. I unclipped it and held it out in front of me. The tape extended on its own, inch by inch, measuring nothing visible. Pointing toward one of the branching passages, it reached 50 feet and stopped, the end hovering in the air like a held breath. Scratched into the metal at the mark were words, Unebin, but deliverit. 30 men entered this passage. How many are you? Footsteps echoed before I could process the question. Not one, said many. Work boots on stone, overlapping rhythms, slightly out of sync, creating a strange, layered cadence that sounded like one person trying to walk in several different ways at once. I counted without meaning to. 13 patterns. A figure emerged from the dark, headlamp off, face lit by my own light. He wore a safety vest, identical to mine. When is Madet? I saw my own face looking back at me. Same scar on the chin, same crooked ear, same scratched lens in the bifocals. You're early, he said, in my voice. You're not supposed to arrive until Thursday. I'm still using Tuesday and Wednesday. He gestured behind him, and 12 more figures stepped into the light, all of Temmi, all carrying measuring tapes that trailed back into the darkness, connected to something I couldn't see. My mouth went dry. The mine needs measurements, the first one said. That's how it grows. That's how it decides where to put the walls. We measure. It adjusts. He glanced at his tape. We've been measuring for 14 years, 6 months, 9 days, or 7 hours. The tape isn't clear. I ran. You'd think I'd freeze, or scream, or collapse under the weight of what I was seeing. But fear doesn't always paralyze. Sometimes it narrows your world to one imperative. Distance is negotiable, but momentum still feels like hope. I ran until my lungs burned, boots slipping on stone that tilted and flattened beneath me. And when I looked back, they were still there 5 feet behind, walking calmly, smiling like men who knew the route better than I did. The tunnel folded. That's the only way to describe it. One step carried me forward, The next delivered me backward through space. And suddenly I was back in the chamber, facing the wrong direction. Surrounded, 13 versions of myself formed a circle, their voices aligning into a harmonic that vibrated in my bones. "You don't understand yet," they said together. "The mind doesn't trap you. It uses you. Every measurement gives it permission to change. Every number you write teaches it how to exist. It's been growing for 70 years. We're its instruments." The first one knelt and drew a diagram in the coal dust circles within circles, lines intersecting at angles that made my eyes slide away. 9 circles of hell, he sighed softly. But there's a 10th, reserved for people who measure what shouldn't be quantified. The mine has 13 levels now. You've mapped 4. Every level contains more space than the one above. Expansion without geometry. We're on level 7, the deepest anyone has returned from. Returned is flexibly. Flexibly. My tape yanked hard, nearly pulling me off my feet. I realized it had extended across the chamber while I wasn't looking, disappearing into the passage behind them. I tried to drop it. I couldn't. The clip had fused to my belt. The housing melted into fabric and flesh, metal and skin, indistinguishable. They stepped aside, opening a path. "You have to finish the inspection," they said. 13 levels. It added that requirement when you entered. My notebook shook in my hands as I opened it. My handwriting filled the pages, but there were more of them now. 13 sections. At the top of one labeled Level 8, a sentence weighted in ink I recognized as my own. "The distance between entering and escaping is not measured in space, but in willingness." I don't know how long I was inside after that. My watch stopped at 3:17 p.m. My phone died. My GPS beacon showed my position as a sphere instead of a point. And then, impossibly, I was at the entrance again. 8 feet, 4 inches. I measured it. 12 feet, 1 inch. Measured again. 8 feet, 4 inches. Both true. Daylight felt wrong, thin and flat. I drove to the office, filed my report, watched the numbers change on the page as I wrote them. My supervisor frowned gently and said I hadn't finished. 13 levels. Only 4 documented. We'd go back Thursday. I've measured every door in my house. None are the same width twice. I measure my height every morning. I'm shrinking by 1/8 of an inch per day. But I still align perfectly with the mark I made the first morning. Every night at 3:17 a.m., the tape extends on its own, measuring the distance between my bed and something waiting in the dark. This morning, it reached 97 feet. Tonight, it'll reach 9. When it hits 100, the distance to the next level, I think I'll understand what Thursday means. 13 men entered the passage. I understand the question now. It isn't asking how many I am. It's asking how many I'll become. I'll be here in the shadows next week, but will you return, knowing what waits in the dark? I took the night security job at the Harlan County Mining Museum because it was easy money and nobody bothers you when the world is asleep. 8 hours, midnight to 8 a.m., steady pay, slow walking rounds through history that had already been embalmed. I told myself it was temporary. A bridge job, something to keep the lights on while I figured out what came next. That lie lasted exactly one shift. The museum sits where the Mason Ridge mine used to breathe men in and out of the mountain. They sealed it in 1979, poured concrete into the shafts, and built a clean, well-lit tribute over the bones. Faded photographs, roosted drills, black and white faces frozen in the confident ignorance of people who didn't know how their story would end. Mannequins stood throughout the exhibits, dressed in overalls and helmets, posed mid-task with lunch pails at their feet and newspapers folded to headlines that would never change. It wasn't scary. It was sad in the way preserved things always are, like a place that remembers being needed. My rounds was simple. Walk the halls every hour. Check the boiler room. Make sure the pipes didn't freeze. Make sure nobody broke in to steal scrap metal or copper wire. The only real sound was the old buildings settling and the radiators clicking like arthritic fingers. Except, sometimes, there was another sound. A pause. A hesitation. The big analog clock above the front desk always stalled for just a fraction of a second at the 47-second mark, before ticking forward again. I noticed it the first night, thought nothing of it. Machines get old. So do habits. Orientation took maybe 20 minutes. The museum director, Patricia, had the kind of thin, papery skin that looks permanently pulled too tight over bone. She spoke in a calm, practiced voice, the way people do when they've explained the same thing too many times. She walked me through the alarm system, the cameras, the logs I had to sign. Then she stopped in front of a nondescript metal door near the West Exhibit Hall. Basement storage. There's just one rule, she said. Never enter the basement after midnight. She said it the way someone might tell you not to touch a hot stove. Not dramatic. Just final. She explained about environmental controls, about air quality sensors that sometimes gave false readings overnight. Said people who went down there at night reported feeling disoriented, loss of time, nausea. Best avoided, she said, handing me a heavy keyring. 17 keys. One of them was brass, older than the rest, with a black tag. That one opens the basement. You don't need it. Leave it in your desk drawer and forget it exists. She smiled, but her eyes stayed flat, as if she were watching something behind me instead of looking at my face. The first 4 nights were nothing. Boring in the way only graveyard shifts can be. The mannequins stared past me. The exhibits gathered dust. The clock paused at 47 seconds every minute like it was thinking about something. I walked. I logged. I drank bad coffee. But every time I passed the basement door, I felt a tug. Not fear. Curiosity. The human itch that starts the moment you're told not to look. On the 5th night, during my 3 a.m. round, I noticed the door wasn't flush with the frame. It was open, not wide, just enough to let darkness spill into the hall like ink, and there was a smell. Earth and old metal, damp and sour like something organic that had been sealed away and decided it didn't like that arrangement anymore. Patricia's voice floated up in my memory. Never enter the basement after midnight. But the door was open, which meant either someone had broken protocol or something had gone wrong. And security checks unusual conditions. That's the job. The brass key was heavier than I remembered. Cold. The lock turned without resistance. The door opened on stairs that fell away into absolute dark. My flashlight beam barely reached 15 feet. I counted the steps as I went down. 23. The walls shifted from clean drywall to exposed stone and timber. The building aging backward with every step. It felt like descending through layers of time instead of floors. The basement was bigger than it should have been. Corridors branching off at wrong angles. Rooms that didn't match the museum's footprint above. This wasn't storage. This was infrastructure. Original spaces from when the mine was alive. I found a records room first. Filing cabinets. Cardboard boxers. Payroll ledgers with names written in cramped, careful handwriting. One box sat open on a desk. Inside were lunch pails, dozens of them. Old metal tins with names stamped into the lids. I picked one up. Marcus Boone. Foreman. I opened it. A sandwich wrapped in wax paper. An apple without a single bruise. A thermos still warm to the touch. I checked another and another. Every lunch pail was full. Every meal looked fresh. 45 years underground, and nothing had rotted. Nothing had aged. It didn't feel miraculous. It felt paused, like something holding its breath. That's when I heard voices. Men talking, laughing. The easy overlap of conversation you only get when people have known each other a long time. It came from deeper in the basement, from a corridor I hadn't explored yet. I told myself it was an audio exhibit on a timer. That explanation was thin, but it was something to stand on. The corridor opened into a wide chamber, and I stopped so hard my foot skidded on stone. 12 men sat in a loose circle on overturned crates and timber blocks. They were eating lunch, drinking from thermoses, talking about baseball scores and busted equipment and the weather turning cold. They wore overalls and canvas jackets, helmets with carbide lamps casting flickering light across their faces. They were solid, real, present, and every single one of them was a mannequin. I recognized them instantly. Same faces as the figures upstairs. Same creases. Same expressions. Except here, they moved. Chewed. Blinked. One of them looked up at me. The one labeled Marcus Boone, foreman. He smiled. "You're late for lunch shift," he said. His voice sounded like wood rubbing against wood. "We saved you a spot." Then the silence learned my name. I ran. The flashlight beam bounced wildly as I tore back down the corridor, breath ripping out of my chest in panicked bursts. Behind me, I heard movement, crates scraping stone, boots hitting the floor in uneven rhythm. Not human. Something stiff, trying to remember how legs worked. The stairs loomed ahead. I took them 3 at a time, hand burning on the rail, eyes locked on the sliver of fluorescent light above. The basement door. The surface. Normal gravity. Normal. Rules. I burst through and slammed the door, fumbling the lock with shaking hands. Dropped the key. Swore. Picked it up. Turned it. The click sounded louder than it should have. Final. I pressed my back to the wall and waited. 4 pounding. Scratching. Voices. Nothing. Silence so complete it rang. I checked my watch. Las 3:47. Alto M. I'd been downstairs for 47 minutes. It felt like 5. I didn't finish my rounds. I sat at the security desk with every light in the building turned on, my back against solid furniture, eyes fixed on the basement door. The clock ticked, paused, tick, paused. Every minute. 47 seconds. At 6 a.m., Patricia walked in. She took one look at me and sighed. "You went down," she said. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt, just made coffee like this was part of the routine. When I finished, she pulled a canvas folder from her desk. "The mine didn't close for economic reasons," she said. 12 men went down on the morning shift September 14th, 1979. Never came back up. Rescue teams found their lunch pails, tools, helmets. No bodies. No collapse. No gas. Nothing that explained where 12 men could go. She showed me photographs, the same faces. Younger. Alive. "The families commissioned the mannequins 10 years ago," she continued. Memorials. That's when the night reports started. Mannequins moving, lunch pails disappearing from storage and returning full. Voices. "How many guards quit?" "Primera." "Ask it." "7," she said. "You're the 8th. She leaned forward. "They're not trying to hurt anyone. They're waiting. Lunch break is the last normal moment they remember. At 3:47, lunch ends and work begins again." My stomach dropped. "If you sit with them," she said, "you join the shift." I quit that morning. I didn't drive past the museum for weeks, but the clock followed me. Every clock. Digital ones glitched at 47. Analog ones hesitated, and sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I smelled damp earth and metal and something sour. And sometimes, just before sleep, I heard a voice, "You're late." I lasted 3 months. That's how long it took for the dreams to stop being dreams. I'd wake up with the taste of wax paper in my mouth, with dirt under my nails, with 47 seconds missing from my memory. I started checking myself for dust, for coal, for signs I'd gone somewhere without permission. One night, I woke up standing in my kitchen, lunch pail in my hands. My name was stamped on the lid. I understood then. 47 seconds. The pause. The hesitation. That's how long it takes a heart to stop after the last breath. The museum didn't let me go. It had already learned my face. And somewhere beneath it, 12 men were still waiting for lunch to end. I don't sleep anymore. I'll be here in the shadows next week. But will you return, knowing what waits in the dark? My sister vanished in the Calamine on a Tuesday morning in October 2019, and the silence she left behind did not behave the way silence should. It didn't sit still. It moved. It followed me through rooms. It waited at the edges of conversations, leaning in when people stopped talking. Even now, I can tell when it's near because the air feels heavier, like it's holding its breath. The last thing Emma said to me before she disappeared wasn't dramatic or prophetic. It was technical. Almost boring. "The echo patterns are wrong," she said, laughing softly, the way she did when she thought she was on the edge of something important. "Sound is coming back slower than it should, like it's taking a longer way around." Emma was a geology graduate student, the kind who loved abandoned places because they told the truth when no one was listening. Her thesis focused on subsidence in decommissioned coal mine cell. The Earth remembers what we carve out of it, how empty spaces never stay empty. The Keller mine had been closed since 1991, officially declared stable, its major shafts surveyed and logged. It was a favorite among urban explorers and researchers who needed real-world data without active danger. Emma signed the entry log at the ranger station at 9 a.m. on October 18th. She never signed out. Search and rescue found her equipment 300 yards into Shaft 4. Camera, sample kit, notebook, water bottle, everything neatly arranged, as if she'd set it down to adjust a bootlace and simply forgotten to come back. There were no signs of collapse, no blood, no panic. The official report cited an accidental fall into an unmapped shaft, the kind of explanation that fits because it's vague enough to swallow questions whole. My parents accepted it. Grief has a way of making people tired. I didn't. I'd spoken to Emma the night before. She hadn't sounded afraid. She'd sounded thrilled. I replayed that call so many times. I memorized the static between her words. She told me she'd been doing preliminary acoustic test taps, recorded speech to measure chamber size through echo delay. In a mine like Keller, most echoes return almost instantly. Hurst didn't. She recorded delays of 20 seconds where there should have been none. It's like the sound is traveling through more space than physically exists, she said. I think there are chambers no one mapped, big ones. I'm going back tomorrow to triangulate. There was a pause then, a faint clicking noise on her end. The clock down there is weird too, she added. Second hand always hesitates at 47 seconds, every minute. Probably just old machinery interference. She laughed again. Then she said good night. After she disappeared, I learned everything I could about sound. I wasn't trained for it, but obsession makes a good substitute for education. I taught myself acoustic analysis, signal delay interpretation, resonance modeling in confined spaces. I filed Freedom of Information requests for Keller Mine's engineering plans, maintenance logs, incident reports. Most of it was dull. Then I found a document dated May 12, 1987. An internal maintenance report. Miners in soft-4 report hearing their own voices repeated minutes after speaking. Initial assessment. Echo chamber formed by collapse. Further investigation reveals no collapse. Phenomenal inconsistent with known geometry. Recommendation. Restrict access pending acoustic study. The study was never completed. Shaft 4 was never sealed. In March 2024, I signed the same log my sister had signed. The ranger on duty was young, name tag reading Chun. His expression polite but distracted. He looked at my equipment shotgun, mic, recorder, headphones and asked what I was researching. Acoustic propagation? I said. His mouth tightened. You're the third person this year doing sound work in there, he said. The last two came out. Both recommended sealing the mine. Reports didn't go anywhere. He handed me a radio. Check in every hour. The mine swallowed light quickly. Within 50 yards, daylight was gone, replaced by my headlamp's narrow cone and a darkness that felt less like emptiness and more like something standing very still. Shaft 4's junction appeared at 10:05 a.m. Emma's equipment was still there, untouched, exactly where the report said it would be. I set up my rig, heart hammering with a mixture of dread and relief. I clapped once, The echo returned instantly. Normal. Then it returned again, 2 seconds later. Then 5, 10, 12. The same sound, layered, as if bouncing through chambers stacked inside one another. I listened through my headphones, adjusting gain, trying to rationalize. Harmonics formed where they shouldn't, overlapping reflections interacting like multiple voices singing slightly out of tune. Beneath it all, almost lost in the noise, I heard something else. A voice. My voice. Calm. Clear. Speaking words I had not said. "Emma, where are you?" I froze. Pulled the headphones off. The mind was silent. Put them back on. The voice came again, closer this time, like it had learned the distance. And somewhere deep in the dark, something shifted, as if the silence had finally noticed me. Then, the silence learned my name. I stood there longer than I should have, listening to my own voice repeat itself in the darkness with the wrong timing, the wrong weight. Echoes are supposed to decay, to lose clarity. This didn't. It sharpened. When the sound came back again, it wasn't my voice alone. It was Emma's. Her exact cadence, the slight upward lilt she had when she was explaining something she loved. "I think there are unmapped chambers," she said. "Big ones." It was the phone call. Word for word. I hadn't played it. I hadn't spoken it aloud. I shouted her name. The sound vanished into the shaft and did not return. 30 seconds passed, a minute. Then my shout came back, stretched thin, layered with other sounds, conversations I recognized but could not place. Chun's voice, my mother's. A man reading from a report, dated decades before I was born. The echoes arrived out of order, some before I remembered making them, others trailing behind like ghosts, struggling to keep up. Temine wasn't the reflecting sound. It was collecting it. I moved deeper into shaft because staying still felt worse. The tunnel bent in ways my map didn't show. Side chambers opened where there should have been solid rock. My headlamp caught walls that curved too smoothly, as if shaped by erosion that followed rules I didn't understand. Voices layered constantly now, a low murmur of decades bleeding together. Emma's voice grew clearer, guiding me forward like a breadcrumb trail made of memory. She was reading from her notes. October 18, 9:47 a.m. Entering side chamber marked storage for B. Storage for B shouldn't have existed. It did. The chamber was enormous, the ceiling lost in darkness, the air vibrating with residual sound. Every surface was covered in maps, hundreds of them. Engineering plans, hand-drawn sketches, topographic overlays. Each depicted the Keller mine differently. Tunnels shifted positions. Chambers contradicted one another. Depth measurements varied wildly. And yet, details matched. It was like seeing multiple realities of the same place laid over each other, none more correct than the last. At the center sat a desk. On it, a recorder. Emma's recorder, still running. The counter showed over 37,000 hours. 4 years. I pressed playback. Her voice filled the chamber, immediate and alive. She spoke of the maps, of measurements that contradicted reality. "The mine is changing," she said, "not collapsing, growing." There was a pause. Then her tone flattened. I understand now. The mind maps itself through sound. Every word adds a new branch. Every echo creates a new chamber. Static. Then, softly it knows. Behind me. Someone spoke. You shouldn't have come. I turned. Emma stood at the edge of the chamber, exactly as she'd been the day she vanished. Same jacket. Same tired smile. She told me she wasn't really Emma Nutt anymore. She was what the mind remembered, assembled from 4 years of echoes. The moment you heard yourself speak words you didn't say, she told me, you started becoming echo. She gestured at the maps. Everyone who disappears here is still here. Talking. Building. She explained it calmly, clinically. The mind stored sound the way stone stores heat. Every voice left an imprint. Over time, the imprints grew detailed enough to stand on their own. When the reflection becomes clearer than the original, she said, the original stops mattering. I wanted to argue. I wanted to deny it. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. Can I leave? Her smile faded. No one ever really does. I ran. Not because I believed I could escape, but because some part of me still obeyed the old rules of fear. The tunnels twisted, folded back on themselves. My headlamp dimmed. Every sound I made returned multiplied, my breathing joining a chorus of other breaths, other footsteps, other prayers. I burst into storage for B again without meaning to, the chamber waiting like a patient mouth. The maps made sense now. They weren't wrong. They were sequential. Each one a record of the mind at a different moment, reshaped by every word spoken within it. Emahor, the echo wearing, waited by the desk. You can stop running, she said gently. The mind keeps what enters it. She told me she'd try to escape too, that eventually exhaustion turns into acceptance. People sit. They talk. Their voices become architecture. She pointed at my recorder. It was on. Check your watch. 9:17 a.m. The same time I'd entered. Time here didn't pass. It reverberated. She explained it like a lecture. Time propagated like sound, bouncing, looping, sometimes returning before it left. You can spend years here and leave minutes later, she said, or minutes, and leave decades later. I walked until I saw daylight and believed in it because I needed to. I emerged into the parking lot. Chun stared at me like I was a stranger. According to the log, no one had entered the mine in 2 years. The date on a screen read March 15th, 2026. The world had moved on without me. My apartment belonged to someone else. My job didn't remember me. I learned to live in gaps, libraries, shelters, borrowed corners of conversations. News articles confirmed my disappearance. Brief and forgettable, but the echoes followed me. I heard my own voice sometimes, saying things before I thought them. Emma's voice, endlessly reciting her notes. Reports surfaced of people near the mine hearing conversations from empty rooms. The echo map was expanding. I'm writing this because sound travels. If you ever hear your own voice speak before you open your mouth, don't follow it. That's not an echo. It's a measurement. The mind is patient. It grows one word at a time. I hear her now, reading this as I type it, already archiving the warning. Somewhere underground, a recorder is running, capturing every sentence anyone will ever speak. And when my recording ends, I'll walk back to the mine, sign the log, and descend into the chamber where all my versions are waiting. I'll be here in the shadows next week. But will you return, knowing what waits in the dark? I make a living deciding how long things can keep standing before gravity remembers them. That's what historical preservation really is: polite conversations with collapse. Spreadsheets that predict when wood finally admits it's tired. When the county called about the Thornton mine in eastern Tennessee, it sounded routine. Surface structures only. No underground access. Evaluate integrity. Estimate restoration costs. Turn abandonment into heritage. I scheduled 3 days in November 2024 and expected nothing more unsettling than rust and rot pretending to be nostalgia. Bill met me at the gate just after dawn, breath fogging the air, boots already coated with red clay. He'd worked maintenance before the mine closed and still moved through the compound, like it might wake up if startled. The buildings were what I expected: administration office with soggy gutters, storage sheds slumped into themselves, a garage with doors frozen half open, salvageable, predictable, safe. There's one structure, Bill said, slowing near the tree line, that needs your opinion. It was barely a building, a squat wooden box at the edge of the property. Roof corrugated and rusted, walls unpainted, windows clouded like cataracts. The shift supervisor's station. He didn't embellish. He didn't need to. He just handed me a folder and waited. 3 contractors, 3 refusals. The wording snagged me immediately. Not damaged, not unstable. Wrong. I told him I'd take a look. He checked his watch, mentioned spotty service, a landline in the admin building, and drove off with relief that felt earned. I approached the station with the muscle memory of 1,000 inspections. Visual first, foundation looked intact. Minor list, nothing structural. I unlocked the door and stepped into a single room that still remembered purpose. A desk, filing cabinets, a wall radio, a chalkboard with a shift schedule dated October 18th, 1983, and in the center of the room, a support beam, 12 inches square. Floor to ceiling, dark timber, clean edges, immaculate joints. 2. Immaculate. I circled it, knuckles wrapping the wood, eyes tracking grain and joinery. Perfect. No checks, no rot, no insect damage. I pressed my palm flat against it. It pulsed. Not a vibration you could dismiss as wind or passing traffic. A slow, deliberate thud that traveled into my bones. I pulled my hand back and laughed once, sharp, already embarrassed. Then I pressed again. The pulse strengthened, 72 beats per minute, my resting heart rate. I stepped away and measured it with my laser. Dimensions, normal height, normal. But without the tool, the beam seemed thicker, as if it occupied more space than it should. I photographed it from every angle. On the camera screen, everything else snapped sharp. The beam stayed soft, its edges refusing definition, like the lens couldn't agree where it ended. The chalkboard drew me back. 7 names listed for the underground crew. 1 erased carefully enough to leave a ghost of chalk. I checked the blueprints. Load-bearing exterior walls only. No interior support indicated known. Recudate. The roof framing was sufficient. The beam shouldn't exist. In a filing cabinet. Beneath time cards and memos, I found a single sheet dated October 19th, 1983. Handwritten. Emergency structural support installed per section. 7 requirements. Beam salvaged from shaft 6, level 3. Load rating. Indefinite. I read it twice. Then again. Beams don't come from shafts to surface. They go the other way. I looked back at the beam and felt the pulse quicken, as if it had noticed my attention. Then the silence learned my name. Section 7 didn't exist. Not in any code, not in any regulation I'd ever studied. I searched the cabinets until my fingers went numb and found a thin folder labeled S7 hidden behind payroll. Inside was an incident report dated October 18th, 1983. Structural anomaly. Chamber says 3J. A support beam responding to tool strikes with audible human speech. Extraction ordered. Chamber sealed. Beam removed for surface containment and observation. Primera. La UGD. Then, I didn't. I approached the beam with my sounding hammer, hesitated, and tapped lightly. The sound was wrong though, wet, like knuckles on muscle. I tapped again. Careful where you strike. The words were a whisper pressed through fabric, but they landed with perfect clarity. I dropped the hammer. It clattered and echoed too long. The pulse accelerated. 80. 90. 100. The beam expanded and contracted, barely perceptible, like breathing. My heart chased it, sinking without permission. I fled into cold air and stood shaking until my lungs remembered how to work. Bill found me an hour later and didn't ask what I'd seen. Just nodded. Shaft 6 had always been wrong, he said. Cold spots, tools failing, miners feeling watched. When the beam changed grain, color, behavior, they pulled it out and brought it up against every rule. They needed it where they could see it. 3 days later, the mine closed. NDAs, severance, silence. It's growing, Bill said, and the building isn't supporting it. The building is containing it. He talked about the mountain like it had preferences, about tunnels as insults, about something adapting to the spaces men make, choosing the shape we trust most. Beams, he told me to recommend demolition. Burn it hot enough to forget. I didn't. I came back with instruments, convinced data would save me. Thermal imaging read 98.6 degrees. Moisture content matched human tissue. Seismic sensors tracked a cardiovascular rhythm. Flesh wearing would like a uniform. The chalkboard changed while I worked. The erased name returned. Mine. Beneath it. Replacement required. Dimensions recorded. Installation scheduled. The beam was larger. In the grain, a face pressed outward. Mine, unfinished. I ran as the room groaned behind me. Bill showed me photographs of the other engineers. 3 faces. Later, more grain. Section 7, he said, was a requirement the mine invented and the mountain enforced. 1 beam removed. 1 installed. I disappeared. New city. New name. Flatland. But the pulse followed. Wood feels wrong now. Grain arranges itself into expressions when I'm tired. Splinters bloom under my nails and return when pulled, painless and patient. I dream of the station, of a beam too large for the room, of a chamber inside it, human-shaped and waiting. In the dream, I step close and feel my heartbeat hesitate always at the same moment. 47 seconds past the minute. That's when I learned what the hesitation meant. 47 seconds is how long a heart takes to stop after the last breath, if nothing interferes. The beam whispers with my voice. Installation complete. Load rating indefinite. If you're reading this because you were hired to assess that building, refuse. Don't measure it. Don't let it learn you. Section 7 is patient. It records first, and somewhere in eastern Tennessee, a support beam is waiting, counting seconds. Practice in your face, learning your name. I'll be here in the shadows next week. But will you return, knowing what waits in the dark? And for years I told myself that was coincidence. Because coincidences are cheaper than truth. Heart attack, sudden and complete, on his front porch, with the coffee still steaming in the mug beside him. The watchmaker frowned, shrugged, said nothing was wrong with the mechanism. 6:47 a.m. I stopped wearing it after that, because some objects learn a habit and refuse to unlearn it. 26 years pass the way years do quietly, until you realize how much ground they've taken. When my mother moved into assisted living, I blew into it experimentally. No sound. Blocked, maybe. I pocketed the watch and the whistle, set them on my dresser beside keys and spare change, and forgot about them the way you forget about things that don't ask to be remembered. 3 weeks later I woke, at 6:47 a.m., to the sound of a whistle. Sharp, piercing, 3 short blasts. Not a melody, a command. The pattern my grandfather had described when I was a kid, the signal that meant emergency. Surface immediately. No traffic, no neighbors. Then it stopped. The blockage I'd felt was gone. The bore was clear and etched inside the mouthpiece. So faint I almost missed it. Counted the faces. 47 men. The discrepancy felt small. I spent weeks in county records, union archives, newspaper. The Morrison Mines history was familiar. Cold country, tragedy accidents, closures, economics. The mine closed 12 years later. In the attic box, I found his journal's daily logs, neat and meticulous. Always 46. But I remember 47. But the photo shows 47, and the whistle knows, and I can't stay in a place where numbers lie. And memory is more reliable than records. I told myself I needed closure, which is what we call curiosity when it grows teeth. Urban Exploration Forum said the entrance was still navigable if you knew where to look. In February 2025, I drove to Kentucky. The site was overgrown. The warning signs rusted into decoration. The welded barrier had been cut away. I entered with a headlamp, a backup flashlight, water, and the shift whistle on its chain around my neck. I wanted to see if it would sound again, if it would lead me to whatever level 5 was hiding. Then, deep in the dark, the silence learned my name. Rusted rails led to a concrete wall, poured floor to ceiling, painted in red. No entry. Acoustic hazard. The whistle vibrated against my chest. Then it blew. 3 short blasts. The sound ricocheted, multiplied. returned to me rung like echoes that had learned to hurry. The concrete wall had a crack. Fresh dust. Narrow, vertical, just wide enough. I squeezed through sideways, backpack scraping, and emerged into a passage older than the rest of the mine. The timbers were hand-hewn. The air was different, circulating, alive. 200 yards in, the passage opened into a chamber circle, maybe 50 feet across, with 7 branching tunnels like spokes. In the center, arranged with care that felt intimate, were lunch pails, metal boxers with names stamped on the lids. Rusted, intact. I counted them. 47. I matched names to faces in the photograph. Inside, preserved beyond reason, was a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, an apple, and a folded note. But the mine erased you. I don't know what you found down here. Don't know why you never came back. I'm leaving. I can't work in a place that eats men and then erases the fact they were ever eaten. The whistle blew again. Not from my neck. A man stood at one of the passages, headlamp on, lunch pail in hand. Young. Tired in the way underground makes you tired. He smiled, sad and familiar. You brought the whistle, he said, and his voice came from the walls as much as his mouth. That means you're here for roll call. He knelt, opened a lunch pail. Empty. 47 men descended November 12th, 1991. 46 surfaced, except in one photograph and one whistle and one old man's memory. Surface forgets we entered. No bodies. No compensation. Just subtraction. He stepped closer. My headlamp passed through him. No shadow. The whistle is the last thing that reaches up. 3 blasts. Emergency. Count your crew. But nobody counts anymore. You're the first to come down here in 34 years. The minute hand stopping. The second hand hesitating before surrender. Thin, primera, deep. I practically busted out of there. Right? Lungs burning into blinding daylight. I hit the records office, digging 4 names from 91. 46 listed, but Samuel Harlan. Gone! I showed the clerk a photo. She saw mentions of Samuel thinned. Tenbani said, leaving sentences that felt amputated. The mine was editing backward, correcting memory to match record. The whistle blows every morning now. 6:47 a.m. 3 short blasts. I'm the only one who hears it. To others, it's corroded brass. To me, it's a count. I stopped talking about Samuel because I watched the photograph change. His face losing contrast, becoming shadow. Soon, it'll be gone. After that, my memory will follow. The mine is patient. I started checking my own records. Driver's license, bank accounts, profiles. Intact. For now. Last week I couldn't remember my middle name. Yesterday a coworker asked if we'd met. My name was on the roster. He looked at it and asked who I was. Here's the part that loops back and locks. The watch. I took it out at dawn. The second hand hesitated at the same place it always did before stopping. 47 seconds past a minute. That's when I understood what my grandfather never wrote down. 47 seconds is how long it takes a heart to stop after the last breath. The watch wasn't broken. It was counting. Numbers are always official because the mind makes them official. It subtracts the inconvenient variable and balances the ledger. One morning you'll wakeif. Waking is the word in a chamber of lunch pails, waiting for a whistle to be heard. You'll blow it. 3 short blasts. Emergency. And no one will count. I'll be here in the shadows next week. But will you return, knowing what waits in the dark? The first thing I noticed was the clock on my dashboard hesitating before each minute advanced. Not stopping, just pausing. The second hand would reach 47 seconds and linger there, trembling, as if reconsidering whether time should be allowed to move forward. I remember thinking it was a mechanical quirk, something to note and forget, the way you do with small imperfections that don't matter yet. I was driving toward the Wicklow mine in southwest Virginia. Coffee cooling in the cup holder. Field gear rattling softly in the back. A routine drive, a routine day. Nothing about it felt like the last time reality would behave itself. I teach undergraduate geology at a state university, which means my professional life is split between classrooms and the field between abstract models on whiteboards and the stubborn physical truth of rock. Part of the curriculum involves abandoned mine surveys, controlled exposure, surface mapping, teaching students how extraction scars a landscape long after the industry leaves. The Wicklow mine was ideal for that purpose. Closed since 2001. Stable structure. Clean records. I'd brought students there 4 times before. We never descended past level 1. There were rules. There was safety. There was predictability. In April 2025, I was leading an advanced group graduate students working on thesis research. We had permission to access level 3. Deeper Tani D ever gone with a class. Coal seam displacement. Stratigraphic. Irregularities. Academic reasons that felt solid and rational. The way excuses always do when you believe the world is measurable. I briefed them carefully at the ranger station. Stay together. Follow marked tunnels. Don't touch supports. Pay attention to depth markers. I emphasized that last point, maybe more than necessary. The depth markers were simple. Metal placards bolted into the rock every 100 feet of descent. Black text, stamped into dull steel. Installation date. Depth measurement. They were meant to be boring. Tools for orientation, for rescue. Reassurance that space could be quantified and trusted. We descended in single file. Headlamps carved pale tunnels through the dark. The mine smelled like damp stone and old iron, the air heavy but breathable. My students murmured observations, scribbled notes, the familiar sound of learning echoing softly off the walls. We reached level 3 at 10:15 a.m. 6 tunnels, met at the junction, a starburst of darkness around us. We set up to survey the exposed coal seam. That was when Narration called me over. "Professor," she said, voice tight, in a way I'd never heard before. "This marker doesn't match." She was pointing at the metal placard embedded in the wall. I expected a misprint, a damaged number. Instead, I saw clean, stamped text. Level 3 to 800 feet, installed 1987. I checked my notes. Level 3 was 600 feet. It always had been. I leaned closer, running my gloved fingers over the metal. No scratches. No dampening. Below the depth measurement was a line I didn't remember seeing before. Measurement accurate as of installation. Depth subject to change. That phrasing bothered me more than the number. Depth doesn't change. Not like that. Not on human time. But I took a photo anyway, told myself we'd report it, and continued the survey. 20 minutes later, James Park found another marker, 30 feet from the first. Same installation date. Different number. Level 3 minus 1,000 feet. I felt something tighten behind my ribs. We verified the slope. Measured grade. Less than 2 degrees. The floor was flat. The markers should match. It didn't. We found more 7 in total. Each one different. 650, 780, 890, 1200. No pattern, no logic. Every single one stamped with that same quiet warning. Depth subject to change. I decided to abort. Whatever was happening, vandalism, error, something stranger ate, introduced uncertainty underground. Uncertainty kills people. I gathered the group. Counted heads. 12. Everyone there. We turned back toward the ascent tunnel. Mara stopped beside the first marker again. "Professor," she whispered. It changed. The placard now read, Level 3, minus 1,100 feet. I was certain it had said 800 before. I checked my camera, already bracing myself for proof. The photo showed 1,100 feet. I felt the floor tilt, slightly, like the moment before an elevator drops. Either the metal had changed, or my memory had, or the record itself had been rewritten. Then, somewhere deep in the mine, the silence learned my name. We moved faster. Not running, not yet, but with the rigid efficiency of people who sense a system failing beneath their feet. The ascent tunnel sloped upward. My calves burned. Sweat soaked through my gloves. Gravity was unmistakable. Up was up. After 15 minutes, we reached the marker that should have welcomed us. To level 2. Level 4. To 1,400 feet. No one spoke. I checked the map. Level 4 didn't exist. The Wicklow mine had 3 levels. Always. I said it out loud, as if stating it firmly enough might restore its truth. They didn't use this style in '87. He was right. The metal looked new, untarnished. Recently installed in a place abandoned for decades. Mara stared back down the tunnel. "The supports," she said. "They weren't like that." She was right too. The timber beams were darker, closer together. The rail tracks we'd passed were gone, replaced by rust scars in the stone. The tunnel felt older, or younger, or altered. We followed a painted arrow-marked surface. The word faded, the promise thin. Depth markers began to climb in absurd leaps. 2,000 feet. 3,500. 4,800. Numbers that implied miles of rock above us. Pressure that should have crushed our lungs. But the air stayed the same. Heavy. Patient. We reached a circular chamber where 7 tunnels converged. In the center stood a single marker on a pole. It was rotating slowly, without wind, without mechanism. The numbers changed as it turned. 500. 1,200. 6,000. 200. A voice echoed through the chamber, calm and methodical. 800 feet. 1,400. 2,200. It was my voice. Not a recording. Not an echo. My cadence. My pauses. Speaking from one of the tunnels, I walked toward it because staying felt worse. Depth markers covered every surface. Walls, ceiling, floor. Hundreds of them, all rotating, all changing, cycling through measurements like breathing. In the center sat a desk, a ledger, and a man who looked exactly like me older, lined by years underground, wearing a mine inspector's vest. He smiled as if he'd been expecting me. "You're early," he said. "The readings aren't calibrated yet." He gestured to the markers. "The mine measures itself through us. Every person who enters adds depth. Not physical depth, experiential depth. Distance from baseline reality." He showed me the ledger. Names. Numbers. My students. Me. Once measured, always retained, he said. The mine is a reservoir. I understood then that we were not lost. We were being archived. We run. Tunnels blurred. Markers flashed negative numbers, as if ascent itself had become another form of descent. The rock softened, holding impressions like memory foam hands. Faces, the suggestion of people who had pressed themselves into the walls and never fully left. We burst into the level 3 junction. Light spilled from the ascent tunnel, the marker at 600 feet. Final. We climbed, scrambled, emerged into afternoon sun. 12 students. All present. The world above ground behaved itself. The ranger's records were clean. The photos corrected. Reality closed ranks against our story. My students disappeared anyway. Dropped out. Mobith, Hawaii. Mara emailed once, describing markers on buildings, on trees, depths assigned to places that should have been shallow. She wanted somewhere closer to the surface. Somewhere safe. Last week, I found a marker in my office. Depth, 800 feet. Subject to change. I dream of the ledger now. Of my older self writing names. Of the number beside mine increasing. I wake at 3:47 a.m. every night. Heart racing. Not knowing why that number matters. But I do. 47 seconds. That's how long the second hand pauses. That's how long it takes, after the last breath, for a heart to finally stop. If you've been underground, if you've measured depth, check the walls. The markers don't observe. They remember. I'll be here in the shadows next week. But will you return, knowing what waits in the dark? The first time the mine went quiet, I noticed it because my watch stopped ticking the way it always had. I'm a paramedic. I measure my life in seconds pulse checks, response times, the narrow windows where people can still be pulled back from the edge. My watch had always been reliable, a cheap digital thing with a cracked screen, but it had one quirk I'd learned to live with. The second hand always hesitated at the 47-second mark, just long enough to make you think time itself was catching its breath. Then it would continue, like nothing had happened. I noticed it because at 4:22 p.m., standing outside the Buchanan mine in West Virginia, The hand stalled at 47 and didn't move. That was the moment the silence learned my name. We'd been deployed as surface medical support after a reported partial collapse in Level 2, Eastern Section. 7 miners trapped. Structural integrity compromised but stable. The kind of call you train for your entire career, because it follows rules. Rock falls, bodies break, lungs fill with dust. You prepare for crush, injuries, burns, hypoxia. Predictable chaos. My job was to wait with the gurneys lined up, oxygen tanks checked, trauma kits open, mind already running protocols. Just a steady flow of radios crackling with updates from the rescue team underground. 6 hours passed. Too long. Even survivable collapses usually give you something noise. Bang in a sign. The mountain gave us nothing. When the first miner surfaced, it didn't feel like a rescue. It felt like an arrival. Thomas Brennan walked out of the darkness at 4:22 p.m. Alone, upright, brushing cold dust off his sleeves as if he'd just finished a normal shift. 34 years old, no visible fractures. Minor lacerations on his hands. Vitals steady. Too steady. I guided him to the medical tent, expecting delayed shock to hit at any second. It didn't. He sat on the cot and looked at me with eyes that were open, but not entirely present. Like he was still listening to something I couldn't hear. I asked standard questions. Name, age, orientation. He answered correctly, calmly, without hesitation. When I asked about the other 6 workers, he smiled. Not relieved. Not scared. Just satisfied. "They're coming," he said. We all found the exit. I asked where the exit was. Level 7. The words landed wrong. The Buchanan mine had 4 documented levels. Everyone knew that. I chalked it up to concussion, marked him for transport, and moved on. Marcus Webb. Same demeanor. Same lack of injury. Same answer. Level 7. The third. The fourth. By the time all 7 had walked out under their own power, my medical notes were full of question marks. They weren't acting like survivors. They were acting like men who had completed a task. After the last ambulance pulled away, Sarah Ortiz found me near the equipment trailer. She'd been running rescues longer than I'd been in EMS. Her face had that tight, controlled look people get when they're holding something back. "We didn't find them," she said. I stared at her. "What do you mean?" "We excavated the collapse. Cleared every possible void. Found helmets, lunch pails, tools. No people." She swallowed. Then, at 4:20, they walked out of Level 1. Altogether, we didn't extract them. She showed me the footage. 7 men emerging in single file. No rescue lights. No escort. Just the mine, giving them back. I should have walked away. Filed it under shock and coincidence. Instead, 2 days later, I knocked on Thomas Brennan's door. His house smelled like coffee and something older. Metallic and damp, like rain trapped underground. He invited me in, sat across from me at the kitchen table, and told me the collapse wasn't an accident. It was an opening, he said. We went down. I told him the mine didn't go that deep. He smiled again. It does. Just not in distance. He described a passage revealed by falling rock. Light below them. Impossible light. Markers counting levels that didn't exist. 5, 6, 7. That's where they were waiting, he said. That's where final shift starts. When I left his house, my watch started ticking again. It paused at 47 seconds. 10 mobade on. I didn't realize yet that it was keeping better time than I was. I interviewed all 7 miners over the next week. I didn't tell them what the others had said. I didn't need to. Their stories aligned with a precision that made my skin crawl. Same chamber. Same benches carved from stone. Same men eating lunches that never spoiled. Same old man with the clipboard who didn't look old so much as worn thin by repetition. Level 7 isn't a place. Brennan told me the second time we spoke. It's a duration. That word again. Duration. Not depth. Not space. Time. Every hour underground. Every ton of coal removed. When a miner reached an undefined threshold, they were assigned final shift. Work that produced nothing. Digging tunnels that led nowhere. Moving stone from one pile to another and back again. Labor without extraction. Repayment. You can leave, the old man had told them, but the count follows. All 7 chose to leave. All 7 began sleepwalking toward the mine. Marcus Webb installed door alarms. They went off 4 times in 1 week. Each time, he was farther away, 1 mile. Then 3. He showed me GPS data with shaking hands, numbers replacing panic. At the current rate, he'd reach the mine in 14 days. I filed reports de teledones, medical records, witness statements, recommendations to shut the mine down. Every response came back the same. PTSD. Shared delusion. No evidence of unmapped levels. Operations resumed. The mine descended again. 22 men went down. 22 came back up. Normal shift. No anomalies. You'd think that would have comforted me. It didn't. It felt like the mountain had proven it could behave when it wanted to. I went underground with Sarah to the collapse site. The wall was solid. Cold. I placed my hand against it and felt the pulse, not vibration. Rhythm. 72 beats per minute. Sarah felt it too. I saw it in her eyes before she spoke. She sealed the section that day. Marked it unstable, told me to forget what I'd felt. I couldn't. I started dreaming of numbers, tallies. Running totals I couldn't quite see. I began noticing how often my life depended on coal, heat, light, fuel. Every convenience added weight I could feel settling somewhere behind my ribs. Cars found at the mine entrance. Boot prints ending at solid stone. Paperwork closing cases with neat language that erased questions. When Marcus Webb vanished, my watch stopped again. 47 seconds. Always 47. I counted the missing miners in the county records. 347 names. A ledger written in absence. I understood then that the mountain's accounting was older and more precise than ours. Thomas Brennan disappeared first. Then Marcus, then the others, all gone within 3 months. I told myself I was different. I'd never worked underground, never held a shovel, but the dreams started anyway. Waking in my yard, facing west, each morning, closer. I called Seta. She told me to stop thinking about level 7. The mountain counts attention, she said. Documentation is participation. She hung up. She drove to the mine that night. She didn't come back. I know now what 47 seconds means. It's how long the brain remains aware after the heart stops. It's the pause between extraction and repayment. The moment where time decides whether to keep moving. I'm writing this because my watch has stopped again. The second hand frozen at 47. I can feel the pull. Gentle and inevitable. I know I'll wake up at the mine entrance soon. I know the wall will open. I know the old man already has my name. We all owe shifts. Every light switched on. Every warm room. Every mile driven. The mountain is patient. I'll be here in the shadows next week. But will you return, knowing what waits in the dark? The story may be over. But the darkness doesn't stop here. What you've just heard is only one fragment of a much larger nightmare one that stretches far beyond a single screen, a single story, or a single night. If you're ready to go even deeper, there's another true horror waiting for you. Watch 9 most disturbing true Appalachian hunter horror stories that will haunt you forever. A chilling collection of real encounters where the hunters weren't always human, and the forests weren't empty. You'll see it right here on the screen. But be warned, once you enter those woods, the feeling follows you out. And if you don't want to face these nightmares alone, make sure you subscribe to Scary Dark Narrations. This is where true horror lives, real stories, real fear, and shadows that refuse to stay buried. Turn on the notification bell, so you're always there when the next story begins. Until next time, keep your doors locked, your volume low, and your eyes open. Because sometimes, the scariest part isn't the story you just heard, it's the one waiting for you next.